Hello, I'm Carl Seibert. Thanks for joining me. Last week, Google announced that it would begin supporting 3 Iptc metadata fields in its Google Images product. The 3 fields that Google is supporting are all related to copyright information. So this is a splendid time to take a look at marking up our photos with metadata in various programs with an eye to taking advantage of Google's newly supported fields. And the fact that they're supporting these fields is good news indeed for photographers. So we have before us now Adobe Photoshop. And Adobe Photoshop is not usually thought of as being a metadata editing program. But in truth, you can write metadata in Photoshop just fine if you keep a couple of limitations in mind. One is fairly obvious. It's pretty much a one picture at a time sort of affair. The other limitation is a little less obvious, and that is that we have only one shot at doing our metadata in Photoshop. If we're working with a compressed format, and we probably are if we're preparing photos for the web that might one day end up on Google Images, we can't save a photo twice. We work on the photo, we tone it, we crop it, we do whatever. We add our metadata, we save it out under a new file name, and that's it. We can't go back and go through our metadata and hone it in waves like we can in a traditional metadata editor where we would probably be working on a batch of photos. So, okay, the disclaimer's out of the way. Let's go ahead and do this. Now, many people are probably aware of file info in Photoshop. People go to file info in Photoshop to look at metadata all the time. Much less often to actually write metadata. But the reality is, Photoshop writes very high-quality metadata. Adobe was the developer of the XMP metadata format, and it's a matter of pride with Adobe that their products write good industry-compliant metadata that will work with any other industry-compliant application. So here we have our metadata editing dialog, our file info dialog in Photoshop. And it's file info from up here. You can also call it with a keystroke, and the keystroke is Shift, Option, Command, I on a Mac, or Shift, Control, Alt, I on a PC. That's quite a mouthful or a handful. It's all the fingers that I normally even use to type, so it's not my favorite keystroke in the whole world. When I work in Photoshop, and many of you probably do the same thing, I use a Wacom tablet and a pen. And if that's the case, the trip across the interface to the File menu is kind of laborious. The keystroke, since you'll have to put the pen down to use fingers on both hands, doesn't sound like a great idea either, and I go ahead and I put an action in my Actions palette to open the menu item for this dialog and many other menu item dialogs that I use. You can see right here on Sharp Mask, image size, and color balance are available to me as buttons not far from where I'm likely working with my Wacom stylus. So, the first order of business before we apply metadata to any photo is to load a template with our standing metadata that doesn't change much from photo to photo. And the 3 fields that Google is supporting, by the way, are all fields that are typically included in your template. So let's go to the bottom of our file info dialog. And we'll go to the menu. And we'll go to Import. And we will import a metadata template. So we'll navigate here to a starter metadata template that I downloaded from my own website. And it's in the .xmp format. The starter metadata template on my website comes in a zip file, and there's an XMP file in it and also a JPEG file. The XMP file will work with Photo Mechanic, Photoshop, and Adobe Bridge. The JPEG file will work with Adobe Lightroom, XNView, and in fact, any program that is capable of saving and using metadata templates. So we've chosen our downloadable starter template, and we've hit import, and we now have this options dialog before us. We have three choices: clear existing properties and replace with template properties. In other words, if there was any existing metadata on this photo, we would clear it and replace it with what's on the template. The second choice, keep original metadata but replace matching properties from the template, would work by overwriting any information found on the original photo where there is information in the template. Where a template field is blank, it would leave the original photo untouched. The third option is keep original metadata but append matching properties from the template, which is really cool. And if we were working in a situation where we were often working with photos that had metadata already, or if we were making multiple passes through our photos to add more metadata, we would really appreciate that. It's a cool feature. But in Photoshop, by and large, you're going to be working on a photo that you are creating from, say, a camera file, and you're going to save it out as a publishable photo. So there's not going to be any metadata on it to start with. We'll just use the clear properties and replace button and hit the button, and we've now loaded our template. Now we can see here that our dialog is tabbed, and we have various views. Now the various views are designed according to what Adobe anticipated different users might like in different circumstances. They are not organized according to the way metadata itself is organized. So here we have in the basic view a field called author, and we see Joe Photographer's name in it. We have in this same view a field called description, a field called keywords, and we have our copyright notice field. We have another view here called Iptc, and this shows us the Iptc core schema metadata fields. In other words, the fields that we really work with every day when we mark up pictures. Now, here we have the creator field. It's exactly the same as the author field. It is the same field, and Joe's name is already in it. And if we scroll down a little bit, we will come to the description field, and it's the same deal. It's exactly identical to the one we see in the other view. So is the keywords field. All right, so now we have our starter template up, and what we would do in real life, what you would do at home, is simply go through this thing and edit the placeholder text and replace it with text that's meaningful for you. You put your name in the creator field. Below the creator field, we have some contact information fields. We have a set of fields for a physical address. We have fields for phones, emails, and a web address. Again, you can replace all of this with information that's appropriate to you, or you can use some of these fields. Not everybody uses all of them. I, for instance, don't put my physical address or my email address in here. I use my business phone number and my website address. I figure people will be able to get in touch with me just fine. Scrolling down here, the next time we see city, state, province, country, and country code, this refers to where the picture was shot. It can be blank in your template, or if you always work in the same place, you can go ahead and fill in those fields and just remember to edit them if you go out of town. The description field, the caption field, has Joe Photographer's byline already sitting there in the back end of the field. That's going to save us a lot of work because we won't have to type it in over and over again. And it actually serves a purpose just by being there. And when you edit to taste, you might not do photo by. That's a style decision. However you want your byline to look, you should put it there. And indeed, somebody who publishes your pictures may adhere to your style, or they may apply their own style. Doesn't matter. Just do what works for you. Down at the bottom of this dialog, we have some copyright-related fields. We have our copyright notice field, and that is one of the ones that Google supports. We have our rights usage terms field, and we have this thing, the credit line field. But now let's take a look at these fields that Google is going to support one by one. There are 3 of them. First up is the creator field. Okay, that's simple enough. That's the name of the photographer. Just put your name in there. Next in line, we have the copyright notice field. And it's next in line logically for me anyway, but Google doesn't actually support this field yet. This field is coming to Google Images in the coming weeks, Google tells us. This is a pretty straightforward thing too. Now, a copyright notice in and of itself has not actually been required in really any circumstance since 1989. But the Copyright Office tells us that it's advantageous for us to have such a field. Well, gee, no kidding, because it communicates to people that this work is indeed copyrighted, which is a bit redundant because almost every work is copyrighted the very instant it's made. But nevertheless, it communicates to people, yeah, we have a copyright, and this is our name. We own this photo. So there are three elements here. One is the word copyright, or the copyright symbol, and our placeholder here has both. The next element is the date of first publication, or the date of creation. This is the year of first publication, or the year of creation. Almost all the time, they're going to be the same thing, and indeed, almost all the time, we're talking about satisfying the needs of Google. That implies publication, because that's the only way a photo is going to get there. The third element is the name of the copyright owner. Most of the time, once again, this is the photographer. Sometimes it's not. Maybe the photographer is a full-time employee of a company that employs him or her to make photographs, in which case that company would own the copyrights. Maybe the photographer has made the picture for a client under a work-for-hire agreement, and the client owns the copyright. Or maybe the photographer has transferred the copyright to another entity, which is actually not the easiest thing in the world to do. Now, the Copyright Office tells us that one of the advantages of having a copyright notice is that it helps honest would-be users of a work find the author of the work and get in touch with them, presumably to buy a license to use the work. So I recommend, rather highly, adding a very brief bit of contact information to your copyright notice field. And we can see here that Joe has put his phone number here. Could be a web address or an email address or something else. And that could work just fine too. Many people put a rights statement in their copyright notice as well, all rights reserved being the most common one, and that could be up here in the copyright notice. As you can see here, it gets along just fine where it's sitting in the rights usage terms field in this template. And the special instructions field is also another place for this sort of statement. If we're releasing this picture under a Creative Commons license, we could put in our copyright notice our Creative Commons license information as well. That would give a prospective user all the information really that they need to go ahead and republish the picture legally under Creative Commons. Now, the exact format of the copyright notice is not specified. You're not going to hurt your copyright if you don't do it exactly some particular way. That said, if you have particular needs or particular questions, I'm not a copyright attorney. Your copyright attorney is, and you should get in touch with your copyright attorney. Attorneys need love too, so if you need the advice of an attorney, give somebody the business and pay them a fee and let them prosper. The third field that Google is supporting is this one, the credit line field. And the creator field and the credit line field are supported today. The copyright notice, as I said, is coming in coming weeks. The credit line field is the most confusing piece of metadata probably that there is. The information that goes in the credit line field is the name of the organization that's responsible for a photo or is distributing the photo, not necessarily the owner of the photo. A practical example here helps. Joe Radel is a staff photographer for Getty Images. If you've ever seen Joe's photos on the web and you've looked at the byline, you'll see it's Joe Radel, Getty Images. Okay, Joe Radel goes in the creator field. That's obvious. Getty Images goes in the credit line field. You can look at it as who you're working for. In the placeholder text, our imaginary photographer Joe has an imaginary studio with his imaginary sister Susie. So Susie and Joe's studio is here in the credit line field. And if I was going to make a byline to publish, it would be Joe Photographer and a slash or a dash or a pipe or some sort of piece of punctuation. Joe and Susie Studio. I'm sorry, Susie and Joe Studio. Okay, fine. That's the bit that goes here in the credit line field. And Google, by the way, calls this field the credit field. Iptc and Adobe seem to agree on it with credit line. The problem is that over the years, people have interpreted what's supposed to go in this field differently. One of the most common interpretations is the entire string that you'd like to see for your byline. In this case, Joe Photographer, Susie and Joe Studio. The problem with that, in my mind, is it makes me crazy because we're mixing two different kinds of data into one field. And no good's going to come from that from a data management standpoint. But what we need to watch is how Google users interpret this field. Basically, however Google users decide to use this field is what we should go with. And it's entirely possible that my sensitivities notwithstanding, we're going to end up with the photographer / the organization all here in the credit line field. Watch this space for further developments. So once we've got our template edited with our own information and everything in here is as we want it, we need to save that template out as our own template. Start with the starter template, save it out as our own template. So we go back to the menu and in Adobe Photoshop, we choose Export as the way to save our template. That will bring up a normal File Save dialog, and it will be pointed at the Metadata Templates folder in your Adobe hierarchy. And we'll give it a name, and we'll call it a demo template, and we'll save it. And now it appears in the flyout, and all we have to do is choose it and apply it. And for the Google part of this adventure, we're now good to go. Didn't take much effort, just a couple of keystrokes. But in reality, we really need to go ahead and give our photo a caption. A big part of the power of photography is its specificity. Photos depict a specific thing or a specific event or a specific person. Without something to tie them to that specific thing that's being depicted, that news event or that person, the photo loses its power. And we're putting metadata on the photo so that it will be useful for other people down the line, maybe 10 weeks from now, maybe 10 years from now. We also want this photo to be useful to us, and to be useful to us, we need to be able to find it when we look for it in our own collection of photos. So we want to have some information on the photo to specifically identify it that we might use when we search for it later. So let's go ahead and give this particular photo a caption. Okay, so we've written a caption here, and you saw that go by faster than real time. But you can see that there was no spell check in Adobe Photoshop. I had to find and correct my own typos, which is dangerous business because I make so many of them. Let's look at our caption as we have written it. And we have a sentence that's very specific to this photo. Records wait for customers at Jones Records at Anytown, USA. And we have another sentence that's background or context information that's important for this photo, and it's probably important for other photos in the take as well. It says that Widget Co., our favorite imaginary company and a frequent client of Susie and Joe, is expanding into the music business and is buying up local record stores, including this one, which frankly, folks, is probably lamentable. Now, that information might very well be useful in other photos. Let's keep that in mind, because remember, in Adobe Photoshop, this is a one-shot deal. I can close this dialog and open it as long as I'm still on this photo, but I can't move on from this photo to another and come back to it. So let's keep that in the back of our mind. We'll look at the keywords field before we go. Now, keywords are additional search terms that might not be in your caption, and they help you find photos in your own library or your own digital asset management system. They're specific to you, and they're for the benefit of you. An exception to this is if you're a stock photographer, in which case this relationship is kind of turned on its head, and the caption is less important, and keywords are more important. For most of us, though, keywords are optional. For most of us, keywords are an option that we will avail ourselves of. And Adobe Photoshop does not have any fancy keywording functionality at all. So if we want to put some keywords in this photo, we're going to do it right here, and we're just going to simply do it manually. We'll type in music, comma, space, and we'll type in retail, comma, space. And those are going to be our keywords for this photo. Now, we could just OK this right now and move on. But I talked about the potential for having other photos in this shoot that we might want to apply some of the same metadata to. Now, with a traditional metadata editor, this is a really big deal, and we have all different kinds of ways of accomplishing this. And for instance, in Photo Mechanic and in Lightroom, we have multiple ways that we could accomplish various nuanced versions of this task just within that program. In Photoshop, we have the copy and paste keys in the operating system, of course, and we have basically one other choice for copying information from one photo to another. So let's take a look. What we're going to do is we're going to go back down to our import-export dialog for our templates, and we'll go ahead and export this information as a template. And it's going to bring up this dialog and a view of our Metadata Templates folder. And in that folder, we have an existing template called test. Could be called anything, but this is just files and folders working here. If I save this template over my test template that's here, I get a normal overwrite or abort dialog. I'll just choose replace or overwrite. Now, I have test in my flyout menu, and it's loaded with this information. So, okay, let's OK this metadata for this picture, and we'll go ahead and we'll save out the picture. We're going to save the picture as, and we'll just save it in this folder right here. We don't want to save over an existing compressed picture. So we're going to call it test output for lack of a better name. And we'll hit save. We'll OK our JPEG options. And there we have it. It's gone away. Now we see the test output is here, and Adobe's actually put the copyright symbol on it, which indicates that we've put copyright metadata on test output. And the original file has just been aborted, and it was closed without saving. So here we have another file that looks like it has something to do with a record store or a yard sale or something that's got to do with selling records. So we'll pretend that we're going to use this file too. We'll start by calling our file info dialog. Remember, we saved the information for the last one as the template called test, which we can reuse over and over again. And here it is. Here is all of the last picture's information brought up on this picture. And we can simply take this first sentence of the caption and delete it and write in a new first sentence that's specific to this picture and move on. That's as close to multi-picture functionality as you're going to get doing metadata in Adobe Photoshop. We'll OK that, and then we can go on. So there you have it. That's about all there is to metadata in Adobe Photoshop. The important thing to remember is You can only save a compressed file once without suffering generation loss, so that means that whatever we do with metadata in Adobe Photoshop is a one-shot deal. Do it, save out your file using Save As and a new file name, and move on. And that, in fact, is actually a common workflow that many people have used for years and years. A very common specific workflow uses Photo Mechanic as the front end and Photoshop as the image editing application. And in that circumstance, you might do your metadata before you go to Photoshop. You could add metadata while you're in Photoshop if you're going to save out that photo, or you could do your metadata afterwards in Photo Mechanic or another metadata editor. But if you're just working on one picture, maybe you're a designer or something like that, and you're getting one picture ready to publish, Photoshop will do a perfectly fine job of applying metadata. And that'll keep us in Google's good graces. That's a very good thing. And of course, it's a very good thing just for society as a whole. You'll get karma points for doing this. So be sure to look in the description. I've put a link in there where you can download the same starter template that we used. I've written many times on writing good captions. If you go to my blog and you search for Caption, you'll find all kinds of references. If you go to the blog and you search for keywords, or for that matter, look on this channel, and there's a series on how to develop a keywording strategy and how to implement it, and in fact, how to do some pretty sophisticated keywording. So until next time, reach out in the comments or on social media. Let us know if there's something that I haven't thought of that we should all know about. Maybe you have a better way. And, of course, until next time, mind your metadata.